let's just go ahead and get started. So, first, I guess let's talk about Love Comes Later and start there. And I guess one thing that I think is would be interesting to hear about is when you were starting the creative process of it, did you know it was going to be a feature? And what was your thought process in creating it as a short with a feature in your back pocket?
Sure. I sort of had this feeling like, exploring something in the motels, and then I wanted to explore an immigrant from India character who was undocumented, and I felt like those areas were pretty rich, and I felt like endlessly rich in a way where I could extract not only a short but also a feature if I wanted to. But I will say that I think the structure for a short film is actually really different from a feature. It's almost like for people who write comedy. I don't write comedy or do stand up, but for people who write comedy, it's a little bit like the joke. You kind of, have to ramp up to the punchline, and then the punchline is the climax. I feel like a short has that type of a structure. You like ramp up, and then the end really has to be shocking and surprising or something, and then boom, it's over. So whereas, like, I mean, I think 20 years ago people would make a 20-minute short film which could actually be several scenes in a feature, like um Raising Victor Vargas. I don't know if
Hmm.
people saw
Yeah.
that, but that's like this iconic short film called Raising Victor Vargas, and then the feature version, and it felt very sort of seamlessly a 20-minute short to a feature. But I didn't see Love Comes Later in that way. I made a really self-sufficient 10-minute, almost like a punch in your face short film, and then I figured that the themes and those types of characters was still fascinating enough for me to then pursue it in the feature realm. But when I started to write the feature, I did it from scratch again, with just the motel as a setting and my central character, who was going to be an Indian immigrant, and undocumented. But started from scratch, sort of creating a new world again for the feature as I did for the short.
How much did the, oh, and for the people who've just joined as well, send all the questions to Kalakar's US profile, and we'll either incorporate them in, or in the last 10 minutes, we'll open up the videos and mics for everyone to ask the questions directly to Sinjugi and Charlotte. And Charlotte will be joining in around half an hour, about 8:30. So did you know that that was going to be your process, though? So you knew that this was a rich enough world that you could tap into. So then how much did the short inform your feature?
Yeah, I knew that the world was going to be rich enough, and I think the most successful shorts, at least the ones that I really love, are really about a whole world. Like, another one of my favorite shorts that I saw at Cannes was all about the world of female bodybuilding. So I think the shorts that like present a complete world, to me, are really intriguing and really successful, because you kind of dive into this whole a rich world, and it's fully immersive and it's different with new detail at every end. So with the short, I picked the world of the motels, which I knew that I could extract several more stories from for the feature. And then now I'm working on a TV show actually based in a motel. So it's kind of endlessly rich, because it's really just a medieval chamber full of rooms, and each room has a different crime happening at all
Mhm.
times, so all these stories intersecting. But the world was captivating from the very beginning, and I wanted to explore in all formats, whether it be a short or a feature or beyond.
Is the TV show an extension of the feature, or is it just like the feature was reimagining the short? Now the TV show is reimagining the feature.
Yeah, the TV show is again sort of starting from scratch into a completely different format. I mean, now the storytelling has to be much more like slower on simmering, for it to really boil over to the 10th episode. So like much different from the format of the feature itself. So structurally they're all so different. So you almost have to reimagine the story, reimagine the characters. The short really just had three characters really, and then the feature has, you know, more of a medley of like 5 to 6, and then now the series is going to have many more, 8 to 10.
So speaking of structures, that's a good segue for structuring your short versus your feature and the beat. So in your feature, it moves very quickly without kind of giving any spoilers away. The first kind of almost inciting incident of what Riz does happens at, I think it's my notes, where are they? Like around 6 minutes in. So it happens very quickly that she starts down her path of what she's doing. I don't want to give it away in case people haven't seen it yet. And how I guess let's talk about structure and the structure of the short and the way the pacing of things happening there, transitioning to a feature and your structure of your feature.
Yeah, I mean, I come from an editing background, as a lot of you know, and I was an editor for like years and years and cut feature documentaries. So my mind structurally works in this mathematical way where I feel like, you know, by within 5 to 10 minutes, we need to be on somewhat of a path, and then the inciting incident really has to come within 20 minutes. And then first act and the end of that should take the hero on a journey to act 2. I mean, Cam, you're so good with structure as well. But I really follow the sort of Sid Fields or, you know, the hide the cat or whatever. Like
Save the cat,
I
yeah.
save the cat, you know, like
Yeah.
I really follow those that structure to a T. But then I find that it's one of those things where, like, when you really know the rules, then you know when to break it, and then you break it more sort of consciously and purposefully. So I have broken it. It's not like it's a perfect structure, but I know when I'm breaking it, and I think you can do that sometimes and not other times. But I think by 30 minutes we really need to feel like the audience can go on a journey with this main character, and the main character is onto something. So it's interesting because the first this is going to be a spoiler alert. Can I talk about the
Yeah.
specifics? Or
Yeah. Go ahead.
I feel like one thing we kept struggling with in the edit was that, you know, Riz's first violent event that happens with one of the characters, Sal, dying, was coming at 37 minutes. And that was really the end of our first act. And we kept sort of, well, at first it was coming at 45 minutes or 50 minutes, but we kept sort of struggling with like how late that was really coming, because we were really taking our time to set up the world. But we struggled with really cutting that down to make it, you know, as close to a 30 as possible, so that like bookended our that sort of ended our first act. But yeah.
So speaking of that too, when you're, you know, I know you're a big fan of film noirs. So this is something where, so just speaking of that, that's something where when Riz steals for the first time and starts going down that path, that in, you know, older film noirs would be the first act break.
Yeah.
And that's now what was your, you know, 6 minute almost, you know, even before an inciting incident usually comes in. So can you talk about your influence from prior film noirs and how that influenced Stray Dolls?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of film noir, and, you know, everything from Blood Simple to like neo noirs like Drive, but you know, and even older stuff like Grifters and Hitchcock like have been hugely influential to me in terms of like not only creating a visual world, but like you said, like following that type of structure that really builds mystery in a simmering way. And I wanted to do that because I think the film isn't really about violence. I think the film is really about the central character and the fact that she makes these choices that we've never seen a woman of color make. So it was sort of important to like take the time to develop the character, which you know, which took from those those older, film noir traditions, but at the same time, there is a bit of neo noir to it too, and the pace is a bit more accelerated. I mean, if you see Drive, which is like a typical neo noir,
Yeah.
it's much more accelerated and much more violent than Stray Dolls. So we fall in this middle of the ground category, but I think the pace was really determined by the character. And I wanted to, even though some things happen quickly, I wanted to take time to really develop her as a character and really, really show us, colors in this character that we've never seen before on
We've
screen.
got actually an interesting question that'll kind of tie into what you just said from Rohini. Is how did you pick the world of the motels for both the short and the feature? Is it from personal experience or more research? Oh, whoops, sorry. Sinha just got muted. Hold on one second.
Oh
There
yeah,
you go.
back. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I think motels are fascinating because of that, film noir tradition, and motels cinematically are so iconic and drenched in neon, which I loved as a visual. But motels are also sort of symbolic because in the 50s and 60s, motels were like the heyday of like American middle class vacation, and these middle class Americans would go and take their kids and jump into pools and have this really wholesome vacation, whereas in the 70s all these Indian Americans and Eastern European immigrants came to the US. They were discriminated against and couldn't find jobs, and simultaneously motels were going into foreclosure, so a lot of Indian Americans bought motels. And now, in fact, 70 to 80% of motels are owned by immigrants and predominantly Indian Americans. So I found this really fascinating. And I think it's a metaphor for me that sort of haunts me. It's like immigrants are resuscitating America and American icons. And then plus the visual side of it is so rich to me. It, gives you so many colors to play with. It gives you these really gray, sort of textured outsider characters to play with. And I really wanted to, both in the short and in the feature, really play in this field where all the characters are neither good or bad. They're just gray and they make mistakes. They're messy, they're flawed. And motels are just such a rich place to really explore these characters that you're not going to otherwise see. So it sort of all came together, both visually, thematically, and I found it to be a great metaphor for immigrants in America.
Yeah. Speaking of visually too, so for your production design and cinematography and lighting, you do mention the neons. There's a lot of like yellows. It's a heavily yellow influence, and then there's splashes of blues and reds that come in. Can you talk about production design and what went into combining and working with your production designer and your cinematographer when you knew you had one primary location and how you were going to portray it?
Yeah, so the work with the building the world was sort of a simultaneous two-pronged approach with the cinematographer Shane Siegler, some of you guys know him, and my production designer Letitia Duarte, both incredible. Some of our references were Spring Breakers, Blood Simple, Drive. I love the color palette Nicholas Winding Refn does, really bold color choices. And because the motels, are already rich with neon, we just wanted to go for it. So we really went for a really colorful world, but then we wanted to also sort of calibrate it and not make it just garishly like every color. We wanted to kind of dull the palette and assign certain colors to certain emotions. So for example, like Riz, every time she appears, she's like drenched in red. Dallas and the motel are usually in blue. So there's a lot of like red and blue contrast that we're doing. And blue became this representation for like entrapment, whereas red was our symbol for freedom. So towards the end, there's like more and more red, whereas in the beginning, with even Una, even the office, they're all dressed in like a lot of blues. So we played with that to really create a certain tone and a certain feeling with the color. And then Letitia is such a genius with like really creating like this world that was sort of stuck in time. So there were details from the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. I wanted this world for us to not be able to pinpoint like what year it was. It was just sort of stuck in a circular time. So she would pick out like all these vintage details. She paneled some of the walls of the motel rooms like in complete wood. She like redid the walls. She did wallpaper. She loves pattern. She pulled in a lot of pattern from the 80s and 90s. So it was like a mix of all of that to sort of create this mood for us to be in the whole time, but also this feel of just being stuck in the motel over and over again. These characters try to escape, but the escape is really not there.
So how did you manage, I don't know if you can talk about budget or if we should wait for Charlotte for that, is how did you get such a rich production value with the budget that you had? I mean, if you could talk on the specifics of really the kind of the nitty gritty of how were they able to pull it off?
Yeah, I mean, our budget was under $1 million, and yeah, I'll touch on it a bit, and then Charlotte can, go into more detail. It was under $1 million, more specifically, like around 800,000, which was
Wow.
not much for like what we were trying to do. I mean,
And it doesn't look like that at all.
the first producers who came on board and who wanted to help produce it were like crunching a $2 million budget, 2.5 million, and they were like, "Yeah, we're gonna raise it." And in my head, I was like, you know what? Like, I'm a woman of color. This is my first feature. I just have a short. Like, no one's going to give me that much money to make my first feature. Like, I just knew that was sort of smoke and mirrors. So we stuck with them for a bit, but then Charlotte and I decided to create our own production company, and we looked for private equity separately. And she can talk about that a bit more, but we really slashed it down and stretch the budget as much as possible. We just really negotiated hard for like a location, for tax credits, for all of these details, but I'll let her sort of go into that a bit more.
Okay. And then casting. So what was the order of the casting, and did that also help raise the money? Because I know Cynthia Nixon was a big name to add to the cast.
Casting did not raise a dime. Did not raise any freaking money. I knew, right, like I knew that Riz could not have been a big name, because it had to be, this was like this immigrant character who just like landed in America. So I knew that Riz had to be this like gritty, fresh face that we hadn't seen. And I thought that it really should be somebody who like literally lives in Bombay and arrived here, so that she had the grit and wear of actually being from another place and had the fatigue of, traveling 2 days to get here. So we started with Riz. I wanted to start with Riz. We were looking in the US, but like I just felt like it should be global and we should get an actress from Bombay. So I was reaching out to casting directors there, friends I knew. Finally, Anurag Kashyap connected me to Gitanjali Thapa, who's incredible. She's done, indies and quite a few shows in Bombay, but she's not a huge Bollywood star. She read the script and came on board. So I had Riz, which, I think some producers would say like get your big cast first, but I knew that this film was not going to be carried by the big cast. So we had Riz. Then we got Olivia de Jong to play Dallas. Again, a discovery, but again, I thought Dallas was somebody who would benefit from being a fresh face, from being a really young, fresh face that we had never seen before. And then Cynthia actually came on board when we had the full financing. So we had the funny thing was we were trying to get a sales agent, and we sent the script to UTA a bunch of times, and UTA just kept telling us like, oh, we'll read it, and was not getting back to us. And then Charlotte and I raised our money, got the financing, and then UTA reached out to us because they found out that we got the financing, and they were like, "Oh, we want to do your sales. We want to do your sales." So it was like such a reversal. And then not only did they do our sales, but they were like, "Come to UTA. We will help you cast the rest of the movie," and like brought their agents in the room. And Cynthia Nixon's agent came in, and she was like, "I'll get Cynthia to read it tonight." Like, I was like, what is happening? Like, nobody was answering my emails at UT for like months, you know? So it's just funny. Like, you know, financing is a huge wild card. And I think if you can raise it somehow, and there are people out there with money, so you can, suddenly like everybody else is like, okay, this is happening, and let's, you know, Cynthia has 2 weeks off, let's put her on something. And but then I think, you know, Cynthia also, we had a lunch together when she had just read the script, she loved the script, she wanted to have lunch, and I told her the lead is coming from Bombay. And I think she was kind of excited. She was like, shit, I get to play against somebody who like has a completely different acting, you know, ethos than I do. And she's like a legit, like Tony Award winning actress. She kind of found that exciting that we were like flying by the seat of our pants. Just,
Did you have anyone else in mind? I don't know if you can talk of your wish list of who you had.
for Cynthia's role for Una, or?
Any of the roles, or yeah, for Cynthia, or did you know that if any of the roles, Una was going to be a name?
Yeah, I mean, no, you know, Una was what could have been a name and could not have been a name. I think, you know, Emily Mortimer was in the mix just because Charlotte and I knew her personally. Um, I mean, for Riz, it was like we were really I was looking for a discovery, like a great discovery face, to put on screen, and just for us to be like, who is this new person? And I think that was important for Riz. Early in the stage, I think one of our early producers were like, oh, let's get Frida Pinto to play it. And, you know, I think we sent her a different script that was not even the final script, but it was like a month and we didn't hear back from her. I don't even know if her agents like passed her the script or not, but I don't know. I don't think she would have been right for it anyways. So thank you.
A little bit of a nitty gritty, but there's a point when I was watching it that when you're talking about immigrants and how a lot of South Asians and South Asian Americans have this dual identity of being South Asian, being American, and Riz herself, there's a lot of shots I noticed. I don't know if it was just my own placing my own thing on it, where she looks very young and glamorous, and then other shots where she looks very old. Like when she's got the opening shot, the close up of the eyes, the wig on, and the way it was lit, and then there's another shot before, or I think it's right after the confrontation with Sal, where the lighting is very harsh on her, and she looks like she's almost 10, 15, 20 years older than she looks. And if that was a choice to show this as your theme of duality through Riz.
Yeah, I think we did a bit of that with both Riz and for Dallas. You know, Riz is this figure. I mean, she's quite young, but she's also just eternally wise. And then Dallas too, we did this thing with age where in the beginning she is dressed, you know, very provocatively, full of makeup. But as the movie goes on, the makeup keeps coming off, and like her acne keeps, you know, being more and more prominent. And by the end of it, she's like in a sweatshirt with acne, and she looks like a 14-year-old kid. And you know, we really see Riz come into her own and take a bit of charge. But in terms of lighting, the lighting is very moody and quite harsh. But it was from just being in motels, from the short, and then visiting so many motels, we noticed that the lighting is harsh and quite dim, and quite, you know, these rooms are quite dull and light doesn't get in. And so we sort of wanted the lighting to feel really naturalistic and really real. The idea was make it rich and dynamic and colorful, but at the same time very gritty and very real. I wanted people to almost feel like they're there, or feel a tactile quality to the lighting. So it really just came from that, and keeping it very in the realm of real.
Did that make it easier or harder to make your shots each day?
Easier.
Mhm.
Easier, because we didn't have big lights. I mean, we couldn't afford them, and I think yeah, we had one pair of big lights that we like never used. But we couldn't even afford the really big lighting package. So, you know, Shane is really smart. He was like, I'm going to do mostly natural light, and, you know, do like just pops of color. And then Letitia was really smart about doing like practical lighting with color. So she would like put a red bulb in a lamp, or throw like a red, you know, cover on something, and suddenly the room would have like this pink glow. So she was really clever with it and that stuff. And like LED lights that are colorful are like so cheap. So we did a lot of that. And then yeah, Shane did a lot of natural lighting, and we just did color very specifically for character, for mood, for themes, and highlighting certain themes throughout.
So you mentioned Shane too. So I'm a huge fan of Oneers. That's one of my favorite things in film. So and I like that actually yours. I had to watch the second time before I picked on. It's kind of a invisible Oneer, which I think is a good thing. And can you talk about that process of that long take
The
at the
first one.
beginning? At the beginning, yeah, the walking through the motel.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted the first shot to be like a one long oneer, and it was like one of my dearest like dreams to do that for my future, like to nail the first shot. And unfortunately, we didn't nail it because, well, for several reasons, we didn't nail it. We didn't have the budget to really have the full day to do a oneer properly with a steady cam, because everything has to be mapped out. We had like 2 or 3 hours to do it, which was no time.
Wow.
We lost light and almost ended up using the full day. That was supposed to be a daylight shot, but it's nighttime because we lost the light. It was winter. But it almost became moody because it's a night shot, and the whole film is shot at night anyways, and the climax happens at night, so maybe it's appropriate that it was at night. But yeah, I wanted one long take that sort of introduced our character and took us through the world, and like she is like who we follow into this world. And I thought that the one take would be the ideal, you know, the ideal use of it would be to use it there to really do multiple things with that take: establish character, establish world, establish conflict with Una. So for that reason, it was the right choice, but we ran into we ran into issues because of our budget. But
How many days was the shoot?
21.
21. And so what was your uh, goal page count, and what did you actually shoot page count per day?
I think our goal was about 4 pages or so a day, something like that, 3 to 4. And we stayed on track. I mean, that's a producerial thing. We had 2 days of overtime, maybe three. One day was really rough because we like lost power in the motel, and you know, several issues happened, and the crew was was very pissed at Charlotte and I. But we only had maybe two, like, yeah, 2 days of overtime on a full feature, which is not bad at all. And we got everything in the can. We didn't have a reshoot. We didn't have a pickup. We couldn't afford a pickup, but yeah, we didn't have a pickup.
And there's a interesting segue question then from Adil about how your background as an editor has helped you as a writer director, and how that informed Stray Dolls.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I feel like I've learned the fundamentals of like character and story arc through editing. You know, who is the character that's going to take you on a journey is a huge editorial, answer that, I mean, especially if you're editing docs, you have to answer. And then how do you captivate an audience from, for an hour and a half, for an act, 30 minutes, for a scene, for a single shot? I mean, what is actually captivating? So I really rely and lean on my editorial instincts when I'm on set, because I'm constantly cutting in my head, cutting, thinking about like transitions, thinking about, is this wide shot going to then cut to this close up right after? And in terms of performance, I'm watching and thinking, can I actually like steer this scene in 3 different directions? Could this be emotionally like arrange? And if I have like 3 different sort of choices and I know I can like shape that scene in 3 different ways, I move on. So I don't waste a lot of time, doing 30 takes. You don't have time for that on a first feature anyways. And I'm good at moving on, and yeah, I just communicate with the AD. I'm kind of like, okay, we're gonna take more time here, but then the next one we can like cut this and this, and and then also just cutting. You're constantly cutting scenes and dialogue as you're shooting, so that is another place where it comes handy, where I just like slash stuff that we don't need.
Charlotte just joined us.
Hi.
Is Charlotte's video on? Yes, there she is. Hi, Charlotte. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
We're doing great. Thank you for jumping on and joining us. We were just going through the short to feature transition on the creative side. And actually, it's a great time you're jumping in, because we were talking about making the days and how it was on the production side of balancing such a small budget into what looks like a much bigger production design, and much more a much bigger movie with the budget that you had, and shooting I believe it was 21 days that you had. And so how were you able to kind of squeeze every last cent out of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when we first did a passive budget, we had in mind like we wanted the budget to be as low as possible. And each time someone came, like joined us, like another producer, another line producer, the budget kept being bigger, and but still quite low for like an independent feature. And I guess, I mean, everyone worked super hard. Like I'm sure, like Sonejuhi mentioned, our production designer was super thrifty, and our costume designer, for example, she worked by herself, like doing all the costumes. Basically, you have to choose people that are not, that they can do like that type of work, that are not too demanding, and that are people that want to be part of this for the right reasons, and not for the people that are used to doing this type of job, for sure. And I think it's funny because we shot maybe like in 3 locations. I mean, the main location was a motel, which helped us a lot, of course, for the budget. And then we had the diner and another, that basement type of place. But I was still surprised that even with 3 locations, our budget was still like, in a specific range. But no, I mean, Sonejuhi, I don't know if you want to add about the budget, but you felt like 21 days was pretty like tight, right?
It was tight. I mean, it was also having a great AD. I mean, Kate, who's incredible and like moves mountains for you, and she's so good at scheduling. I mean, she was a huge help to the producers as well, because she would be like, well, why are we doing this here? Why don't we do this all together and like save, right, Charlotte?
Yeah, no, she was, and the fact that she was on the short as well, like we knew each other so well, and the DP also was part of the short, so we knew how to work together. So definitely that was helpful. And I mean, Kate, I recommend to anyone, and our line producer Lara was also like amazing. Everyone worked so hard, and it was a great, I mean, first experience for a feature, for sure.
So that's an interesting thing about assembling, because as a lot of first-time filmmakers are doing is assembling your team, and a lot of your team came from the short. So could you talk about the choices you made, I guess, at the time of the short, and then knowing who to keep on, who to change, and the process of putting your team together?
Sonejuhi, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think you were touching upon that. I think we tried to take as many people, as many people as possible from the short, who we had a shorthand with. I think in some capacity, it was also good to have, like Letitia, we had on the feature, not on the short, but she had done a feature before, and we really needed a production designer who had had some, experience. So I think you have to like match the two. You can't just take your whole crew from your short as much as you want to work with everybody again. It has to be like the key people from the short, but then also some people who have some experience so that they can like challenge each other and keep the bar pretty high in terms of delivering on timing and keeping morale up. I mean, you need a balance of both, like good morale, but also like keeping the bar pretty high. Like, remember, Charlotte, that one point where our gaffer, we got a new gaffer in the middle of the shoot.
The key grip replacing John.
Yeah, John Blasey. Yeah, we replaced John Blasey. I mean, it was like a technical thing. Like John had something else, and he was only going to be there for half of it. But we got somebody else who was like so pumped to be there that like he energized the whole like lighting department. He was like creating like his own like cool lighting, and like everybody got excited. I mean, you kind of need like this mix of both, of like people who are gonna keep the team and the spirit up and excited, but at the same time are gonna bring a lot of experience to the table.
And some crew members had worked together on other features that we were not involved with, like the line producer, the AD, the script soup, all came from like other like sets together, so they definitely knew how to work well, which was really important. There was generally a really good vibe. I felt people were happy to be there.
We did wine and alcohol every night, which helps a lot.
Yeah. For sure.
Can you talk about your writing process? We've actually had a few questions that have wanted to know, one, how long it took to write the short and how long it took to write the feature.
The short, I think, was maybe like a month or so. The short didn't take that long. We had a few drafts, and then we workshopped it once at so back then it was Shuffle at you guys. The short didn't take that long. The feature was quite long. I mean, I had a draft that I had taken to the Cannes development lab right after the short and workshopped it there, but after that I knew I had to like redo I knew I had to start from scratch over again, and that was the point where I wanted Charlotte to come on for us to work together and sort of like get it done faster. And I mean, not just for faster, but to collaborate together on it, because we had similar sensibilities and complemented each other. But it was a process. It was like, what, 2 years at least, 2.5 on the script.
Yeah, it's very hard to find a good writing partner. I was always like wary about it, and when you find the right person, I feel like I'm talking about like dating, but it is like a dating game. And I guess how we work, we first share like movies that we like and like ideas, and then we come up with an outline together, and then we kind of divide the outline between us two. And then it's crazy how it goes really fast, because I mean, I'm like, okay, I want to like give something to Sonejuhi like by the end of the day, and then she reads my stuff, I read hers, we kind of fix some things and discuss. And we're writing a TV show right now, and we wrote the pilot like in a week. So I think I've written with other people, and it's not the same. You just have to find someone who like complements you pretty well. I think Sonejuhi is a great writing partner.
Yeah, it's a really weird mashup. I haven't been able to write together with anyone else, so I think it's really rare when you can like find the right compatibility.
And also like we, I mean, just to add that we went like to motels together, so we kind of knew that, I mean, me being on the short, of course, was super helpful, and I knew the world already, and it was great to put that into words.
So
Yeah,
you mentioned,
we went and saw a lot of motel owners actually and collected a lot of stories directly from them. So it all sort of became various scenes and anecdotes that became part of dialogue and stuff in the screenplay.
you mentioned cans. So could you talk first how it was getting Love Comes Later into cans, and then the help, if it did, or how it helped impacted raising the funds for Stray Dolls that you had the short in cans?
I mean, we got in because I just like applied blindly. Cannes was the first place we applied to with a rough cut, just like sent it in with the, like 2 submissions at Cannes. I didn't know any programmers. I didn't have any, connection, and I didn't have a track record either because I'd just done one other short. So, and they watched everything. It was really quite shocking. They watched everything and liked it and took it in. We had a great screening at Cannes. I think it was a fun festival to be at. Cannes does this development lab, Semaine de la Critique does it, where they bring in all the short filmmakers for 10 days in Paris and Moulin d'Andé, where Francois Truffaut used to write, and they help you just sort of create a vision for the feature, whether it's from the short or a completely new feature, but they really help you put that together. And they had, at the end of that lab, they had connected me with several producers, but a lot of them were European, and they're amazing European producers, but I knew that because it was going to be an American production, that we were going to need American producers. So, I mean, it was helpful. Of course, it was so helpful, and I took all that advice. I wouldn't say it was like an easy shortcut to funding by any means. And then Charlotte and I did Tribeca All Access and a couple of different Tribeca labs as well, which again were super helpful in giving us so much advice and development advice and how to do things and introducing us to several producers. But again, it was never like a shortcut to funding. I think that's like the extra sort of work.
I,
Yeah,
I
go
just
ahead.
want to add, it's funny because when we went to Cannes, there was like many networking events, and we were like, okay, we need to hustle. We need to find like investors, and we did try to do that, but nothing really happened out of it. And Tribeca was like life-changing, I think, because Tribeca All Access is an amazing program where you meet a lot of producers. And we were with a production company for a year. Um, and to be honest, well, because of creative differences, we kind of we separated from them. And Sinha and I decided to raise the money, like just us two. We were like, okay, let's just do this. We've wasted a year. And Sinha was an editor at Final Cut, and she had a great relationship with the head of Final Cut, who decided to give some in-kind equity to the film. So, which means editing without like giving cash, and I think any person here can say like every director of a first feature is a producer. Um, which is why Sinha is credited as a producer on this film, because she did as much work as I did, or Ed. And so it first started with Final Cut, and once you have the staple of being at Cannes and having Tribeca behind you and having some sort of money in place, people start to listen to you and want to know more about the project. And another thing that Cannes brought us was we were part of a program, this another American director, and he had made a feature after his short. And so as a director and a producer, you need to do your research and see, okay, who financed their movie. And Sinha noticed that it was someone like from who had like an Indian descent, so there was a connection there, and that person actually funded like nearly half of the film. And to get there, I mean, we emailed him, and then we met him in person, and I mean, we did the work basically, and it was very lucky. Like I mean, we all know a lot of filmmakers, and it doesn't happen like that all the time. And sometimes you get the financing, and um, the financing like pulls out. And we were very lucky with this investor. And once he was on board and Final Cut was on board, we just had like a few other thousands to raise, but and we managed that through like the people that we like, our network basically. But it's basically, if one person believes in you, then I mean, it's like Lady Gaga says. I don't want to quote Lady Gaga, but she said so. There's one person in the room, and I don't remember what it is, but you just need. I mean, the lesson that I learned was make a great movie. Hopefully, it goes to an amazing festival, and once you have that, it opens so many doors. And but you still have to hustle. It's like it's not easy, for sure.
But also just like read all the credits of like other similar independent features as what you're making, and see who the EPs are, and then track them down and hunt them down. Yeah, that's my takeaway.
All right, so we are going to get to the Q&A section now, and we're going to start with some rapid fire questions that we ask all the guests, and it's going to start with, you both can go whichever order you'd like to. One book you'd recommend to a filmmaker. It does not necessarily have to be a film book.
Okay, I'll go. I love Elia Kazan's book on directing. I gave it to Charlotte, actually. It's one of my favorite books. Yeah, he just teaches you to be present and be a good human, and so much of directing is yeah, being present. I also love Ingmar Bergman's book on directing as well. I just read all the directors' biographies basically, and I recommend all of them, as many as you can find.
It's funny. It's gonna seem like a joke, but it's not a joke. The biography of Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's pretty good actually, because he's had such a crazy life, and he used to be super poor in Austria, and he kind of became like so many different things, like the bodybuilder, and he also had like a gardening business. And I think I heard of his book through the Tim Ferriss show, which I don't know if you guys listen to that. It's like an interesting podcast on how people make it. And so just listening to his life story is pretty impressive. And you should see the documentary as well. He has a documentary on him. I think it's called Pump Iron. It's great to read about someone who's gone from nothing to being like the California governor, for sure. And that would be my book.
Okay, next, one movie.
And read poetry, I think, is also important.
That's good.
Director.
One movie you find yourself going back to for inspiration.
The Conversation. It's this is the one movie that it's both Charlotte and one of my favorite movies. I think Coppola is such a genius, and I mean, in fact, Godfather too, and The Conversation, and even Apocalypse Now. I can just like go through like every film he's ever made, and go back to it at any point and find more. I recently saw Persona again. I'm a huge Ingmar Bergman fan as well, and my God, that movie is just so incredible. It's all done with like these incredible close-ups, and so much storytelling can come through with just like a tiny movement and in the face. And it goes to show like how visual of a medium film really is. You don't I mean, it's not a heavily scripted film, but it really is incredible character development, and really holds your attention. Those would be my two first go-tos.
I was gonna say something, a movie from the 70s as well. Anything with Al Pacino, like Dog Day Afternoon or Serpico, which I love. And more recently, I love Lynn Ramsey, and I go back to her short films, especially Gasman, who's for me that's a film that's always like a reference for a visual reference.
Ratcatcher as well. Lynn
Yeah,
Ramsey is a huge one.
I feel she's so underrated.
So underrated.
So as a little tip to James Lipton, what one career would you not want to do?
Oh.
Accountants.
Accountant, good. Real estate agent.
All right, what would you tell your younger self?
Don't be afraid of failures. I think, because you encounter them when you're young, but you're also encounter them after you make your first feature, or after you make a few features. And I think it just makes you stronger. It builds chops, and I think you come back even stronger.
Yeah, I would say something similar, like keep going, and you can do it.
And then a shout out to our old application process was one of our questions was, what type of food would you be and why?
Oh,
that's interesting, because it has like so many layers, because it's like, how do you want to be dressed, and how do you want to taste, and how do you want to smell and stuff? Because my first thought was sushi.
Mhm.
That'd be fun to just be like
raw.
Yeah, just be really raw. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, that's being really naked too.
I want to be comfort food, like a burger or something.
Yeah.
All right, now let's open it up to some questions. We've got one from, if we could open the mic for, where did it go? Debelina. Debelina has a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much for this really rich conversation. I was wanting to know what best prepared you to make the leap from short films to first feature?
I mean, to be honest, I think you're never ready to make either a short film or a feature or to make any kind of film. So I think I wasn't ready to make the short film, and I just decided that I have to make it. And then I wasn't necessarily ready to make a feature either, but just knew that like I had to do it because that was going to be the next step. I mean, now looking back, there's so many learning lessons that I've taken from the feature where I know what not to do, and things that I should have done, and just so much that I've grown doing it. So yeah, I think directing is one of those things, like you can never, there's always going to be a blind spot. You're never going to be overly confidently ready to direct anything, to be honest, because it's not just that it's such a living and breathing thing. It's not only that the crew is like living and breathing and you're constantly like dealing with the the sort of emotions of the crew, but then it's the actors too, and they're literally I'm communicating so much emotion, and it changes every minute, it changes every hour. There's in no way in hell that you can be like ready to fathom or take on all of it. But I think it's just this idea of wanting to do it, and then you do your best keeping up with the wave of it all. So I think you're never ready. Just do it.
Okay, thank you.
And then we have another question from Rohini. And Rohini, you can turn your video on, your camera on. So we'll unmute you and you can turn your camera on so we can see you.
Hi guys, thank you so much for doing this. This is amazing. I think I had two questions, both more related with the design side of your project. One was that, did you purely use the locations of the motel and diner, or did you additionally have to recreate some of those locations as standalone sets in order to cheat around with camera and character movement? And the second question was that you mentioned it was a super tight shoot. You had 21 days to do everything. So how did you work on your art, camera, lighting, prep time that these departments needed and integrate them into your shoot? And kind of also how do you kind of negotiate with these locations to have that prep time given to them?
Yeah, we used, we didn't recreate anything in a studio or a set separately. They were all real locations. We got this foreclosed motel that we used for a predominant part of this, the shoot. And then we just had a couple of other locations. So everything was on. And I'm a huge fan of that because it creates, you know, it creates realness and the actors feel it. Everybody feels it when they step on set. And then your second question was just about, what was it again?
Kind of more about the prep time, like, because you have such an intense shoot where you have 21 days. So how do you kind of juggle prepping these locations and in advance?
Yeah, we had 6 weeks of prep time. Our production designer, Letitia, had gone to the motel about 3 weeks or a month before, right, Charlotte? Was it 3 weeks?
Yeah, 3 weeks.
Yeah, she had gone over there 3 weeks before, and she had, you know, she had a whole art team, and she was already doing all of the major, you know, wall, you know, reconstruction of walls and carpeting and stuff like that from 3 weeks in advance and really setting it. We had 2 other sets, which she got in, I think, a week before and set everything. So, but because there weren't too many locations, she was able to just hang in at the motel and really work on that for a while.
Oh, that must be a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Next, we've got a good question from Lapika. Lapika, you can turn your video on and unmute.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
All right, great. I was curious about one mistake that you made that you learned from that you won't repeat on your next film. Some lesson that you learned.
Wow, like so many. So many. I mean, I think I really learned, this is like a small technical thing, but you know, anytime you have like a Steadicam or a dolly, like it just takes so much longer. And, you know, initially the ambition was like, oh, like I wanted to look really slick and really, you know, sort of bigger budget. But we just didn't have the time to really do that. I think we had Steadicam for only 2, maybe 3 days. And even on the 3rd day, like I began just like cutting some of the Steadicam stuff out because we just didn't have the time to like, you know, block it and map it and do all of that. So the timing of what that actually takes was a huge learning lesson. What else? I feel like with actors, it's like different every time because it's, you know, such a in-person thing, but I just, you know, I lucked out. I had an incredible cast and they all came on about 1 to 2 days before. So I got to do a little bit of like rehearsals with them, a little bit of like stunt blocking and rehearsal with Riz and Dallas. I would just love more time, but who knows? I probably wouldn't even have what I had on this moving forward. But no, I guess what I learned was also like my way of working with actors. I think it's maybe not as much about actually rehearsing the scenes, but more just like these in-depth conversations that sort of like go beyond just the film. It just goes into the imaginary world of the characters and what they would do otherwise. And I started to develop a lot more of like what I started to scratch the surface on, you know, on a lot that I think I would use more in my second film.
Thanks.
That takes us to 9 o'clock. I know, Charlotte, you've got to get back to your hard out, but thank you guys so much for taking the time, for sharing your stories and participating. Really, really appreciate it. So thank you guys. Thank you both so much for doing this.
Thank you guys so much for having us. It was so, you know, lovely questions and really thought-provoking, and thanks for watching and for listening and being engaged. Thank you.
And next week we're going to have Tony Gilroy. So Adil or Vishesh, do you have the picture to put up on the screen? If you sign up for our newsletter, you'll be able to get the link to Tony's talk next week. Here it is. There it is. So that'll be our next two. Next week is Tony Gilroy, and the week after is Gurinder Chadha. So those are our next two Meet the Kalakar talks. Thank you guys all so much for being here. Thank you to Sonejuhi and Charlotte for taking the time and talking to us about Love Comes Later and Stray Dolls and the jump from short to feature.
Thank you guys so much.